Good morning, everyone. I'm Ray Pucci. I'm the president of the Delaware County Chamber of Commerce, and on behalf of our volunteer 15-member board of directors and our 370 members, thank you all for joining us this morning, and thank each of you for joining us this morning as our panel members. The Chamber believes that thriving communities start with prosperous businesses. The Chamber supports our entrepreneurs by advocating for public policies, and we're going to be discussing some of those this morning, that create an environment in which private enterprise may thrive. We promote our region as a great place to live, work, learn, visit, and play. We continue to connect business owners with the resources and the networks that they need to grow. We initiate efforts that build our community capacities and improve our quality of life. We believe in collaboration, and we believe that the surest way to success is a partnership among business, government, community groups, and education that is based on respect, trust, and honesty. Finally, the Chamber believes in the potential of this region, our residents, our institutions, and all who call this special place home. We believe that we can preserve and protect the best of this region while continuing to offer economic opportunities and promoting growth. At the Chamber, we like to think, that we engage in many views so that we as an organization may speak with one voice. And through that process, ultimately, we are stronger together. And that's what we're going to do this morning, is hear those voices, hear our voices from some of our legislative leaders at the state and federal level, and they're going to hear us and our concerns, the concerns of businesses, the concerns of residents. Couple things, just a couple housekeeping notes. I think by now you all found where the restrooms are, right around the corner as you exit the theater to your left. I hope that you picked up one of the programs for this morning's program. You'll see short biographies of each of our panelists, so you get to learn a little bit more about who they are. On that table in the hallway, you'll see our our business advocacy resource guide that the Chamber produces. This is one of this is one of many resource guides that the Chamber has produced that are available at our website at delawarecounty.org, and I encourage you to take a look at those. You'll see things like diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging toolkit, fair chance hiring toolkit, and starting a business and business resource guide and other information. But I hope that you take this and all the contact information, not only for these 5 gentlemen and their staffs, but also our local elected officials, town and county. 2 other bits out in the hallway I just want to bring your attention to. One is next Tuesday, the Empire State Development, SUNY Delhi, the Chamber, other partners are hosting a presentation and meeting and conversation regarding the Consolidated Funding Application, or CFA, process. Incredibly important. If you are part of a business, if you work with any of our community groups, nonprofits, not-for-profits, municipalities here in Delaware County, critically important workshop. That's going to be next Tuesday, the 25th, from 1 to 3:30 in Sanford Hall, which is, as you leave this building, walk to your right. Had to think. I got the thumbs up from Dan. I know I'm in the right place. And you'll come to Sanford Hall. That's in the afternoon. One issue that I hope that we'll discuss that's tied to this is the governor's executive order regarding pro-housing communities. And if your community, town, or village has not started the process to become a pro-housing community, the reality is that your organization, your business may not be able to access these funds. Critically important. The chamber has started a few months ago an effort to inform, educate our municipal leaders across Delaware County as to the pro-housing community initiative and the repercussions of taking no action. Thus far, I'm pleased to tell you that as of at least a week and a half ago, Delaware County had 10 communities that at least had started the process to become pro-housing communities, including the village of Margaretville, and our mayor from Margaretville, John Hubble, is with us this morning, and Kevin Green is here somewhere as well from the town of Sydney. We, remarkably enough, Delaware County, as of a week and a half ago, led the southern tier counties in the number of municipalities that have at least started that pro-housing process. So I applaud those efforts. And finally, out at the table outside, one of the things, again, I hope that we'll have a chance to discuss is public transportation. As we all are painfully aware, Delaware County has not, never has had a option for public transportation. The chamber spent about 2 years bringing together national experts, New York State Department of Transportation, private businesses, government, healthcare, human services, steering committee of about 30 people to look at transportation options here in Delaware County. This is the report. Don't read it late at night, folks, please. It's also available on our website under the resources tab. This has been in the hands of representatives of our county government since October. With no action, we're going to continue our efforts to advance this idea. But I encourage you, if you have not already read this, or at least browse through it, take a copy, look at it online, familiarize yourself with it, because we hope, my 15-member board and I hope, that we're going to continue to try to elevate that conversation regarding transportation. Okay, enough of the unpaid announcements. Let me introduce to you our panel members here with us this morning. From my right, moving closer to me, Marc Molinaro, our congressional representative, Peter Oberacker, our state senator, Joe Angelino in the New York State Assembly, Chris Tague, also in the New York State Assembly, and finally, Maher, also in the New York State Assembly. We're kind of bifurcated in 3 ways in the Assembly, and as now finally a single state senator, and we are certainly pleased to be part of New York 19, what continues to be the most rural and one of the largest congressional districts, I think, in the United States. So the question I would ask each of our panel members, and Marc, let's start with you. Would you talk for a little bit by way of introduction, offer an introduction, but also what are some of your legislative priorities as it affects us here in Delaware County?
Thanks, Ray, and glad to be with all of you this morning. I'm just happy that I don't have to follow Assemblyman Tague. We're longtime friends, but he's one of the few people who can talk more than I can, and I appreciate it. Glad to be with all of you. There is little question that I'd love to be back here telling you of all of the great successes that the House and Senate have engaged in this last year and a half, but too often it seems that folks have been focused down there more on theatrics than on outcomes. That said, I'm grateful, however, that we have achieved some progress. And for the folks that I represent throughout the 19th congressional district, 11 counties from where New York meets Massachusetts to Ithaca, New York, it is one of the largest districts in the country. It's the second largest in the state, but it shares a lot of unique challenges. I serve on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, the House Agriculture Committee, and the Small Business Committee. So let me offer you just some of the both priorities and some successes we've achieved this year. For us, I think in upstate New York, it's absolutely necessary that whether it's Washington or Albany, our government respects us, pays attention to the challenges we face, and ultimately tries to provide relief for our small businesses, farms, and families. On the Ag Committee, I will tell you, thankfully, 3 weeks ago, we finally adopted a bipartisan farm bill. Why is that important? The Farm Bill is not only important for ag policy around the country, but it's critically important for some of our infrastructure development. The USDA being responsible in many ways for assisting small and medium-sized communities in rural districts around the country for infrastructure investment, water, sewer, housing, and broadband high-speed internet. Critically important. That bill, which I was grateful to play a role in getting adopted, I think there's about 9 or 10 provisions within the bill that we wrote, will assist in directing new dollars into communities to advance high-speed internet access, cell service, and to work with small towns, villages, and cities to advance water and sewer infrastructure, which is critically important. If we're going to move economic growth, if we want, as as Ray was talking, the state is promoting housing, you can't do any of that without ensuring adequate infrastructure. And of course, in this state, it's just too expensive to move infrastructure projects. I know our local government officials know this, but because of state finance law, the burden really is shouldered by too few, and the costs become too high. Of course, we have aging infrastructure, and in order to make those investments more affordable, you really do need the federal and state partners. So the Farm Bill includes that investment. Additionally, the Farm Bill includes nutrition investment. So most of the Farm Bill is, in fact, food stamps, and providing for those who are less able to make ends meet access to good quality food. And so we expand the ability of food stamps to purchase local produce and products, really important in a district like ours, specialty farms, crops in particular. But we expand the access to make those kind of purchases. The Farm Bill also includes an increase over the next 5 years in food stamps by about $6 billion, and expands the ability for seniors to get food delivered in rural communities, really important. And that, I think, for us, provides some great value. We're moving forward with pressing the state, and my colleagues here can probably talk a little bit about that more than I can. But we're pushing the state to move the federal investment in infrastructure. $2 trillion adopted before I became a member of Congress. Really important getting to states like New York. The problem has been that New York State has consistently been unable to move infrastructure dollars effectively. So roads, highways, bridges, significant aid are made available through the federal government, but the state has yet to develop a robust plan to move those dollars. When we last met with the governor, bipartisan delegation, we really pressed upon her to ensure that not only do they get the dollars on the ground, but they ensure equitable distribution. The problem has been that the big cities see the money and the smaller cities and small rural communities don't. And we're really putting pressure on the administration, the governor and the state administration, move those dollars to communities just like ours. And then just lastly, and I know you'll have specific questions, and I much rather answer questions. I also, Ray, much rather be on the ground with the people I serve as opposed to propped up on a stage. But maybe next year we'll work that out. But
I knew that you were going to say that.
I do. I've said it. I say it. It's just so uncomfortable. I don't think that we're that much. We should be raised above you. But for my work on the Small Business Committee, really moving a couple important priorities. One, greater elimination of redundant federal regulation as it relates to small businesses. Transparency when it relates to regulation of small businesses. I sponsor the Posted Act, which is meant to get the federal government to speak in normal English as opposed to bureaucratic English when it comes to regulation and policy for farms and small businesses, driving down and eliminating redundant regulation to drive down costs and make it easier for small businesses to thrive and survive. thrive. We know this is necessary, and really putting pressure on the federal government to drive down cost on small businesses. And within that same category, I just would tell you, I've placed a great priority on trying to assist those with intellectual, physical, and developmental disabilities to reenter or enter the workforce. Highest rate of unemployment of any population in the country. 70% of those with disabilities remain unemployed and on the sidelines. I won't get into every piece of legislation I sponsor, but to tell you that it's critically important that we allow and engage with that population to get folks the opportunity to work. Not only does it enhance their quality of life, but it really enhances the ability of businesses and farms to welcome new people to employment, and really enhances their overall business as well. For communities like ours, it takes a whole population, quite frankly, that too often get overlooked, and empowers and creates opportunities that really benefit them and the businesses themselves. I'm thrilled to be a representative. Quite frankly, it's the highest honor of my life. I know the challenges we face, everything from access to daycare, as I said, to infrastructure, to the high cost of living. We still in this state shoulder the highest burden of taxation of any people in the country. So we all have to work together. We've got a great relationship amongst us. We all work together, but we all have to press both the state and the federal government, drive down cost, make it more efficient for businesses to thrive, and to respect the small communities upstate New York that too often feel a lot like we're simply funding or supporting downstate, and that or the policies of downstate, and that has to be a unified message from all of us. Ray, glad to be with you. Happy to answer any questions.
Peter?
Well, thank you, everybody. Good to see you. Thank you for taking the time out today. You know, I am kind of used to following either Assemblyman Tague or Congressman Molinaro, and it's an uncomfortable lane to be in. The air is kind of sucked out of the out of the room, so to speak. So I was at an event, and I actually gave about a 10-minute talk, and an individual came up to me and said, "Senator Oberacker, that's probably the most I've ever heard you speak." And I was like, well, because I wasn't following Molinaro or Tague. So there is I'm used to it, I guess is where I'm going, folks. Number one, again, thank you for coming. Thank you for allowing me to be your senator. It has as well been an absolute privilege to represent you in Albany. Couple things on my laundry list that I was quite proud of this year, kind of under the public safety umbrella. We actually passed in the Senate making EMS an essential service. And when I first started out, I was told it had been tried, it hadn't happened, it wasn't going to happen, and we made it happen. And here's how we made it happen. I was carrying legislation to make it an essential service. And for those of you that don't know what that means, it simply means that there was no funding in the state budget for making it an essential service, which is our EMS service, which is just mind-boggling to me, right? If we look at it. So I was carrying legislation. I was told it wasn't going to cross the finish line. I went to a colleague from across the aisle and said, this really needs to happen. Sat down and gave the background as to why and how important it is. Much to the credit of Shelley Maher, who did carry it. Working across lines, we got it passed in the Senate. Amazing. Unfortunately, we couldn't get it across the finish line, but it will be, I think, something high on our priorities next year. And the governor has already signaled that she would sign it if it passes both houses. Under an energy umbrella, I'm really interested in the green energy, the green hydrogen perspective to what this offers. And I'm working on a project that would actually look at instituting passenger rail service from down in Orange County, coming up through Sullivan and ultimately ending in Binghamton, and it would be driven by a green hydrogen powered locomotive. Something I think that would be really interesting from Port Jervis up to get folks out of the city into the Catskills, up along that side of Sullivan into Delaware County. Hancock was the original endpoint, but we've since extended it to Binghamton. Seems to be gaining some success. Actually, Senator Schumer, which was briefed on the project, is looking at it favorably, and Commissioner Dominguez in DOT is as well. So it's starting to move, although slowly. Remember the Green Acre Express. I'll just plant that seed with you, is what we're trying to call it somewhat. And I'm not a marketer. I am the ranking member on the Transportation Committee. So roads, condition of roads, infrastructure, bridges, extremely important. And especially if we start to look at getting into the EV atmosphere that's out there, laden weight of those could pose an issue when it comes to what we're looking at for infrastructure, bridges, and things of that nature. One thing under that as well, the CHIPS program, which is so vital to our local municipalities. And as a former town supervisor, there was what we called EWR money, extreme winter relief monies, that could only be used in the wintertime. What I'm proposing this next legislative session is to change that to extreme weather relief money, and it would allow our local municipalities that are seeing these microburst storms that are actually washing out culverts, which can be as expensive as a bridge to replace, and having a system set up so that those local municipalities could actually apply for this money. The new chair, Senator Cooney, for transportation, and I get along very well. He's in favor of this project, so we should have some new information coming down as far as that. Under education, I was extremely proud to fight for funding our education system. The governor in her proposal had, I would say, severely dismantled that. And the thing that I was taking more homage with that is the amount of the runway that was given. There was no signaling, there was no time for superintendents of schools to react, especially when it came to their budget time. We fought, we got it refunded, and as we start to move forward, I think we're going to see a little bit of a change when it comes to that. I'm actually trying to see if we can't look at giving superintendents either a different timeline for their budgets, so that when we in Albany can't pass, that it would actually allow them time to complete their budgets and not have to budget from a defensive position. So looking forward to questions. Again, looking forward to what this spring and summer has to offer. And with that, I will then turn it over to one of my assemblymen in my district, as the three here, Joe Angelino.
Is that okay, Ray?
Anything the senator wants.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Ray, for inviting us, and President Bondaroff, thank you for allowing us to use this beautiful facility. I took a walk around this morning in search of coffee, and I got to see a lot of the campus, and it's beautiful. So I represent the 121st Assembly District. It's very, very large, not quite as large as a Senate district, but it's 6 counties: Madison, Shenango, Otsego, Delaware, Broome, and Sullivan, portions of each of those counties. So I go from the Catskills all the way up to the suburbs of Syracuse. My priorities, and I'll just rattle them off real quick. My district is all agriculture. I've got heavy industry, and I'm very appreciative for Raymond Corporation and Green, right here, in Walton, Empire Steelworks. They're down there doing great things with fabricating bodies for trucks. So I have a lot of industry, particularly in the Broome County area, Kirkwood, Conklin, along the interstates. But agriculture is king in my district. And the king of industry in my district is Chobani. And Chobani's employing thousands of people. And they come in daily. They're making investments there. I think this next investment they announced is $75 million to the facility in Columbus. Columbus is a township that gets overlooked because Chobani's address, post office address, is New Berlin. So the people in Columbus are very touchy about that. So I always want to mention that Chobani is in Columbus. So agriculture. Next, public safety. And I know if you looked at my bio in there, it says I was a police officer for 36 years. And when you're thinking public safety, it's got to be police. But it's actually fire, EMS. And I am a volunteer fireman for Norwich. As a matter of fact, I tried to silence this. If there is a call, this is going to make noise. I apologize. I'll try and, you can silence your phone, but it overrides the silence. So, and my wife loves that at 2 in the morning. So public safety is a big issue in my district. I have 6 counties, and of those 6 counties, 4 counties have 4 different ways of providing rural EMS. And it's something that, hopefully you never need it. When you need it, there is no substitute for the ambulance with 2 EMTs on board. And there's a lot going on with that. This year, I ran an ambulance service, had 4 ambulances, and it's a challenge. The EMTs, it's not really a civil service job because it evolved from volunteerism. And so there's not a career path for them. So with the EMS's essential bill that didn't make it through the assembly, because there's a lot of pushback, and it's unwarranted, but that's what's happening. We did pass legislation that we hope the governor signs that allows ambulances to pay for not transporting, which happens a lot. Probably 40% of the calls, somebody calls because they're worried about their grandmother, or or somebody fell and they just need help getting back up. And that absorbs a lot of time. And it also takes away from other emergency calls. Not that somebody laying on a floor for 5 hours isn't an emergency, but there's no transport. So that's a problem. And that hopefully, we can get that rectified. Now, my district is not the most affluent district. I do have some affluency, but we rely a lot on bootstraps and volunteerism. And you can tell that if I'm a volunteer fireman in Norwich, by the gray hair, that I can't keep doing this much longer. And but I'm one of 2 people in the 2 volunteers in the Norwich Fire Department that can drive the ladder truck. And that's a very important piece of gear. It's the biggest toolbox you've ever seen, and it needs to be at every fire. And if myself or John are not available, it doesn't go out the door. If it does go out the door, there's a paid man on overtime getting paid to do that. Another thing in my district that's a priority for me is our school districts. In January, there was a shot across the bow of every upstate rural school district that the governor sent across and said, you're going to have to deal with the population loss. And I don't know how we're going to do it, but when they were looking at draconian cuts that were going to cut right down to the core, and we were able to restore that, but the governor sent signals that, you're just kicking the can down the road and she's not going to do it next year. Now, if you take a look at Delaware County, it's 45 minutes to get anywhere because you either have to climb a mountain or go around a reservoir. And you really can't consolidate these schools, or our children are going to be on school buses for 2 hours a day. And that's an issue that I don't know how we're going to deal with it. I don't know if consolidation is the answer, but we have a model of BOCES that are overseeing a lot of these school districts. And speaking of BOCES, I have 5, you know how big a BOCES district is. I have 5 of them that I have to deal with. So that's 5 BOCES superintendents, and they all have good ideas on how to do things. And I guess the rural equity, we hear about equity a lot in Albany, but when it comes time to start doling out tax dollars back, the rural areas, the voice just isn't heard. And I scream and yell as much as I can until they're sick of hearing me. But rural equity, I'm on the corporations committee of the assembly. The corporations is where the MTA comes through. And when the MTA shows up, their conversation always starts in billions of dollars. And it's just, it just breaks my heart to see that so much of the state taxpayer money goes down there, and we hear the subway and the buses as our bloodstream, and that's how we get to work, that's how we get to school. But we subsidize that so much with state money that it would be the equivalent of giving us, $50 a week for gas to drive to work and get to school. We never see that. And it's much more than that. It's the broadband. We talk about broadband. I've got areas that I'll drive for 15, 16 miles with no cell service. And if you're in Delaware County, you know that well. If you get to a hilltop, you pull over, and I see cars parked on tops of hills all the time. People are on their phones. just a little bit about the assembly. There's three of us sitting here. And I heard Ray say we finally only have one senator. But from the assembly perspective, you have three. That's three votes in the assembly chambers for Delaware County. And when things happen, when you need legislation passed, you have a better chance of getting it when there's three of us, because I get along with everybody. And when I first started, I talked about ag. One of my best friends in the assembly on the other side of the aisle is Donna Lepardo. She's the chair of the agricultural committee. You think I'm not going to be friends with her when I told you ag is the biggest industry in my district? And she and I have a very good working relationship. She comes to me with help on ambulance issues, and I have to go to her on agricultural issues. And she was nice enough that Bill, that we were talking about earlier, if you know anything about the assembly, she's the sponsor and the very first co-sponsor. If it's a Republican, that means it was our bill, and she was gracious enough to carry it. And there's a couple of her bills that I'm the first co-sponsor, because she talked to her people about ambulance coverage and realized that was a good idea, and she's getting them across the finish line. Lastly, about the assembly, before I pass it on, there's 150 of us in the assembly. 100 of them are from New York City, Long Island, and the bottom of Westchester. That leaves 48 of us upstate. All right, so that's why we're always yelling for rural equity. And when I say yelling, who has an Apple Watch? Anybody have an Apple Watch in here? Has anybody ever had the loud environment go off in their Apple Watch? I did not know that existed in my Apple Watch until one day Chris Tague was yelling about dairy farmers, and my watch started vibrating and it said, "You're in a loud environment, you need to get out." So I'll let you listen to the great Chris Tague.
I don't know what to say now. Well, first of all, I'm Assemblyman Chris Tague, and I approve this message. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Ray, Delaware County Chamber, and all you folks that are here today. I'm going to stick mostly to agriculture. And I don't know why the hell you don't ask me some questions, Joe. Why you always go to Donna?
She comes to me and you see it every day.
I'm the ranker on agriculture, but anyways, the upstate economic driver is still agriculture, and especially prevalent here in Delaware County. And of course, the rest of my district, Greene, Schoharie, Otsego, and Ulster counties, still the areas that I represent, prevalent economic driver is agriculture. Successes. Let's talk about the legislative successes that we have had in agriculture. And I'll tell you, the last 3 years, and I believe it's because of the working relationship on both sides of the aisle in the Ag Committee. Donna and I get along great. And I have probably the most experience with regards to agriculture on that committee because I was actually a farmer. There's only 5 of us in the state assembly that actually have any experience in agriculture. So we work together. We feel that the Ag Committee is more of a bipartisan committee, and it's worked very well. Nourish New York program came out of a legislation that I put together that helped this state out unbelievably during COVID. The Certified New York program, Farm to Table program, the collaboration between Farm Bureau, NEDPA, Department of Agriculture, and both houses in the state legislature, and everybody working together has been able to promote and get these programs moving. And I'll tell you, if I was back in the dairy farm business again today, I would be doing just that. I would be doing my own processing, marketing my own product. To me, it's the only way to move forward in today's world. And part of that problem is because of the failure of New York State over the years to bring processing to the forefront. 90 some % of New York State's processing is done out of state. we get the product in New York, we take it to Pennsylvania or New Jersey or Ohio or Connecticut, we process it there, then we bring it back to New York to sell it. Let me just say this, and not just because the president of the university is sitting here. My friends, we have four of the greatest agricultural colleges in the world. Two of them right in my assembly district, SUNY Delhi and SUNY Cobleskill. But we also have Morrisville and Cornell University here in New York State. Leaders in agriculture. I say this all the time on the floor. I say it in the Agriculture Committee. New York State should be leading agriculture, not just here in America, but across the world. We have the greatest quality control. We have the greatest farmers. We have the greatest growing seasons because we have 4 unique seasons. We should be #1 in everything that we do. Now, going to the problems is the problems is we don't invest money in the right places. We have our priorities screwed up. And here's a perfect example. I'm assuming that most people in here are business people, and I was a business. That's where I came from, was the business world. We should be investing money in our infrastructure. I see a bunch of people in here that I know that are running their businesses from their home. Do you have internet service? Some people do, some people don't. That's a big business mistake if you don't have internet service in today's world. I consider internet service part of our infrastructure. I argued this year's state budget, $243 billion. When I first went to the assembly, and I've been there the longest out of anybody sitting up here, the budget was $168 billion. 168 billion. Now, 243. And we've invested all kinds of money. But the problem is the money that we've invested are in policies, okay, that are not in the best interest of the the entire state of New York. $10 billion just this year, okay, in the migrant crisis, okay, and in renewable energy. $10 billion. But your roads and bridges, they kept it flat. Your education system, they kept it flat. Why couldn't we spend an extra $500 million on infrastructure to help with the internet service, the broadband, help our roads and bridges, make it safer in our communities? That's where I get very aggravated, especially as a business person, not as a member of one party or the other. Just as a business person, when I ran my own business, I always prioritized. I kept track of everything that happened every day and where I lost money, where I lost time, where things would break down. And I kept track of how to fix that and how I could keep production going without that cost or without that problem happening. Unfortunately, New York State government doesn't do that. And they need to. They need to start doing that. And, and I could go on and on and on, but everybody here has pretty much said what I would want to say too. Sometimes rural upstate New York is left out in the cold. I try to be the loud voice. Joe can tell you. He gets very upset sometimes when I'm debating on the floor over rural issues. But this is my home. This is where I was born and raised. This is the place I love. And why shouldn't we have the opportunity to succeed in rural upstate New York just as much as somebody that lives in Westchester, New York City, or Buffalo? We matter. We mean something to the economy. They forget about us, but the truth of the matter is we mean. I know somebody right here in the audience, they're not here representing their family business. They're here with somebody else. But these are folks that started off with nothing and have built a beautiful business in rural Schoharie where people travel all across the country to come to their business or do online shopping. That's what we need to do. But if they didn't have the infrastructure set up in their company to be able to do that, they'd be no farther ahead today than they were yesterday. So with that, first of all, I just want to say it's an honor and a pleasure to serve those of you that are in my assembly district. I am much better than the other guys up here, but no, in all honesty, it is a honor and a pleasure to serve you. But we have a lot of issues that we need to talk about. We need to compromise more. We need to talk about them. We need to take the ones that are working and make them better. The ones that aren't working, we need to scrap them and try again. So again, I'm going to pass it on to my good friend, Mr. Maher or Mr. Maher over to my left, but thank you all for the opportunity today and God bless you.
Thank you, sir. All right. So a lot of the issues were hit by my colleagues. Some of the issues that are important to me, well, first off, the 101st district is going to change, one of the few that did actually, and it changed everybody else's for that reason. I'm born and raised, and predominantly my district is Orange County and Ulster County, and I will be adding into the district the town of Middletown, town of Colchester, and town of Hancock to go with the town of Andes. So those are the 4 towns that I would be representing beginning in January here in Delaware County, which I'm very excited about. The issues that are very important to me that I've really focused on and the committees that I sit on are drug and alcohol abuse, mental health. And when it comes to economic development, for me, infrastructure is key. But when I talk about economic development, the 2 areas that I really focus on are workforce development and career paths. And I think it's great that we're here at SUNY Delhi, which obviously is going to and continues to play a tremendous role in that front. EMS is something I'm very happy that my colleagues touched on. It's something I'm extremely passionate about. When I was supervisor of the town of Montgomery in Orange County, my hometown, prior to being elected to the state assembly, we tackled that issue. We created an ambulance district to help subsidize our volunteer, part paid nonprofit EMS ambulance corps. And we were able to actually create an ALS provider within our own town service in just the town of Montgomery. And for those that don't know about basic life support and advanced life support, there's a very big distinction. And that is something that we are learning hard and fast is where we need to really invest. And again, this could be a nice opportunity and a conversation with SUNY Delhi because Assemblyman Angelino is correct. There is not a huge market and career path for these EMTs. And if essential service were to be made possible in New York State, one fact that remains is if every single community had the dedicated EMS services, had the funding to create dedicated EMS services, there simply would not be the bodies to take on those paid positions currently. So that's something that we need to get ahead of, knowing that potentially next year that could become law, and I hope it does, and I will be a co-sponsor. When it comes to essential services, there's actually a package of bills, one that would also include funding, but also one that would increase insurance reimbursements. It's a multifaceted approach. EMS is in a really bad place, not just in New York, but throughout the country, really industry-wide, even in major cities. And it's been forgotten for a very long time. But it is, in my opinion, should be on the same playing field as fire and police. Those individuals that are currently paid employees working in ambulances, some of them work 80 hours a week and then they volunteer in other towns. That is where we are right now in our EMS industry. So it deserves our attention, it deserves our support, and we need to get very creative in how we're going to support the industry and create incentives for people to go into that field. And I do think SUNY Delhi and our institutions are going to play a vital role in that, as well as the state. One area, education funding, I'll say it, my colleagues didn't say this, the Assembly Republican minority really held the governor's feet and our colleagues in the majority feet to the fire during the budget process. We sounded off every single day, starting with our ranker, Doug Smith, and we held conversations and put press releases together and talked to our districts. I know here in Delaware County, Franklin would have had to have dissolved, I believe, their 9 through 12 and consolidated if the funding cuts were to stay. So all those things, all those stories, all that advocacy was done in a very cohesive way by our conference working together. And I do believe that was a big part, if not the reason why the governor was forced to really put that back in the budget. So I want to thank my colleagues for that. Big shout out I want to give to Senator Oberacker. Not a lot of people hear and see some of these things, but there are 3 assembly members in Delaware County, and we all have our own priorities. We all have different things we're doing. Senator Oberacker brought us all together, everyone in his Senate district that's an assembly member, to have just a general conversation and discussion, and that was really important. And not a lot of people do that. And I just wanted to give him that kudos. Not a lot of people know that meeting happened. We didn't really promote it, but you all should know. You know, he didn't have to do that. He went out of his way to make sure we were all working together and had good synergy and had that discussion. And that's something I just wanted you all to know. I don't know if I'm in trouble for saying that, you know, but we all got together, and I want to thank Senator Brocker for that. They've been great for me. I'm a younger freshman assembly member, and one thing that's really cool about our conference is we have a blend of institutional knowledge and experience with some youthful vigor. And one thing that I have really loved is being able to watch and listen, and hopefully not make mistakes by just jumping in. And these colleagues have, one, been able to point out some of those mistakes, and two, allow me to not make them in the future. And that ability to actually have that conversation with me is something that I appreciate. So you certainly have a good dynamic here. And the last thing that I want to chat about is legislation, right? So one piece of legislation that I was able to work on and get passed was a bipartisan task force that would look at fiscal cliffs in our social services system. When we look at our social services programs, we have a lot of folks that are dependent on those services, but they are disincentivized to work. And there are some changes that need to be made so that we can create incentives for people to go ahead and get back off the system and work and be in jobs. And that's something that we're going to look at that we got bipartisan support on. So we're very proud of that. The last thing I'll say is AI and technology. It doesn't get a lot of attention yet. There's a lot of interest in it. When it comes to what is going to happen next and how our entire society is impacted, AI is going to play a big role in determining how we make our decisions. And that's something that we all ought to keep our eye on. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. And I am pleased to say each of these 5 gentlemen on the stage are friends. And that's that relationship that the chamber has established with each of them. And it takes work on both sides. Couple themes. First, I want to open this up for questions and for conversation. So as you have questions, I ask that you come down to the well of the theater, to the microphone, right next to where we're going to have Mark set up next year for the event, and ask those questions. I have some questions on behalf of the chamber, and I will intersperse with your questions, but I want to make sure that we have time for to talk about your concerns and what is affecting you and your business and your communities. One theme that I heard in all those comments, and thank you for those, is how do you build that sense of rural equity? You know, we know that we are, as a population, outnumbered in throughout the state of New York, and often the priorities of a community here in Delaware County is not the same as one in Lower Westchester or within the 5 boroughs or on Long Island. How one of the priorities that the chamber has set is building community capacity. And in my introductory comments, you heard about some of those, the transportation effort that I hope that we'll come back to, working with the state, working with whoever will work with us to find sources of funding coming into the county to our institutions. 5 of you are minority members in the state legislature. Mark, you are a member of a very narrow majority in the House of Representatives. Given that reality, how do we, as those in this room, how do we build our community capacity? And what's your role? What's your responsibility? What are your obligations in that effort? Who wants to start? Peter's grabbing the microphone.
Great question. To me, it comes down to education. And what I mean by that is I had a conversation with my colleagues from across the aisle, and this individual was opining on how large their district was, which was 3 towns. I then informed my colleague that I have all over parts of 7 counties. And so we talk about how do we start to build that, and how do we start to have that as being understood. And it really comes down to education. You know, when I tell, again, my colleagues from downstate that I travel 18 miles one way to get groceries, there's this almost look of shock and horror, you know, on their face. So it really does come down to, and one of the terms I've kind of coined, if you will, because we hear a lot of times common sense doesn't, you know, we need common sense. And I've coined the term country sense, because it really is not so much a Republican Democrat. It really isn't. It truly is an urban and rural, as we have said before, issue for them to understand terrain, weather, distances, and then of course the overall economic from the town's perspective, you know, what we see. I mean, someone spending $70 for gas, trying to put food on their table, and then you're talking about other issues that come to mind, you know, and it really does come down to having them understand the challenges that we have up here. And I think that would go a long way, right, to starting to build that not only conversation, but building that. We're talking about building infrastructure on many levels with that, as well as in our local municipalities.
Hang on one second, Chris. You'll get, nobody wants to follow Chris. Yeah. So here's some mechanics of how things work in the assembly. Yes, we're outnumbered. It's generally 48 to 102. But it's not the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the dog. And we debate everything. And the 3 of us up here have all debated on the assembly floor, and we're always outvoted. But there's somebody else in the assembly chambers that people don't realize. In the back, there's usually somebody from the governor's staff, and they take notes and they keep track of what's going on. And when these bills pass the Senate, because the Senate is smaller, the Assembly, believe it or not, usually votes on Senate bills because they have to be identical. So the Senate is smaller, they pass them to us because they get them done quicker, and then we vote on them after debate. Well, the governor's office is in the back of the room, and everybody knows the governor can sign it into law or veto it. But the other thing that people don't realize, but they're starting to, because this governor does it a lot, Governor Hochul requests chapter amendments. And those chapter amendments are generally changes to the law that she says, overall, it's a good law. These little things here we need to change. And if you change them, I will sign it. Those chapter amendments come out of our mouths. So that's how your representation happens. And this governor has been doing a lot of these chapter amendments since she's been in office. Specifically, one I did was on, it was a small bill, but it came out in a package after the Buffalo Top shooting that they wanted to prohibit the sale of body vests. I don't know what a body vest is. I asked, they couldn't define it. So the governor didn't sign that one until they decided, is it going to be bulletproof vest or body armor? But that happens a lot in the chambers. The governor's staff listens to the arguments that we bring up, and that's how your rural voice gets heard. And I don't know, Chris is closer, but please.
we were talking about the divide between downstate and upstate, or the rural versus the city. I have had a farm tour for the last 6 years. And that farm tour brings legislators from Buffalo, New York City, all those areas up here to teach them the difference of living between rural upstate New York, the metro and the metropolitan area. Actually, this year we're going to be in Delaware County again. We were there 3 years ago. But I have told other members, whether they're in our house or the other house, that these are the types of things to do. When you're on a committee, bring folks from other, especially those that are in charge of the agenda that's being pushed. Get them up here. You know, we went to SUNY Cobleskill during one of our farm tours. Hopefully we can incorporate SUNY Delhi. We've done quite a bit of extensive work with Cornell. We've never been to the college in Ithaca. We're going to, not this year, but maybe next year if I'm still there. This year, our focus is Delaware, Otsego, Schoharie, Herkimer counties. And we're going to be, it's a 3-day tour. We're going to be staying in Cooperstown and then traveling. But it's been a very very big success. We're talking 50 to 60 Republican and Democrat members, and mostly from the city, that come up here every year. Now, we do concentrate on agriculture, but we do take them to other businesses. And, you know, and I'll end it with this. A couple times when we've been on the bus traveling, one of the New York City members says to me, I can't get my email. I said, that's exactly why I've been asking you for $500 million so we can make sure that broadband is completely, you know, across the whole state. So anyways, there are efforts in place, and not just me with the agriculture. There are other members in our conference and in the Democratic conference that actually do have events like that. And I've been saying we need to do more of it. There are a lot of people in New York City that are even members of the Assembly and Senate that actually do not know where their food comes from. Do not know where their food comes from. To me, that's awful. Can't live without food. So we're going to continue on, and anybody here that would be interested in being involved in that farm tour, you're more than welcome. We usually include the chambers of commerce from the counties and most of the ag businesses, and it's usually an excellent time. So, and I see you looking right at me. You'd be a perfect place to go to. We'll have to make sure you're last on the list, though. Right?
All right, I guess we'll end with the congressman. So I wanna say the spirit of the question was for those that maybe are in the minority, some of the value that we're able to bring. And I think my colleagues hit it on the head with the legislative aspect, especially the chapter amendments. I'm very happy Assemblyman Angelino mentioned that. It's something I take a lot of pride in terms of debate prep and having a voice up there. But one thing that I love to do is work with our local nonprofit organizations, our financial institutions, our medical facilities. I'll go out and tour facilities just to completely educate myself on all that's out there. And when you have roundtables, when you have discussions, and you have the ability to say, hey, I'm the assembly member, I'm going to call you, and I'd like for us to sit and have a discussion, you can leverage that title and that position to have conversations, which can yield positive results. We have 3 charitable funds in Orange County with our community foundation. And I know we have a representative of the South Central New York Community Foundation here, and Tina, and the O'Connor Foundation with Amy here. Those organizations are filling the gaps, the holes that are in our society, whether it's our government programs, healthcare, infrastructure, and really helping people as boots on the ground. So whenever we can, as elected officials, myself as an assembly member, not just be your government representative, but take my position and be a leader in your community, the more that you engage us and ask us, the more that you see, hopefully we're able to do and help.
Congressman?
Thanks. I won't belabor the point, but I will say what, Ray, what you asked is what can we do to build capacity? And so I
Yes.
hearken back to my days as a village mayor. First of all, these gentlemen all go to battle for upstate New York and the state legislature. The one thing they didn't note, and it's not to correct them, but to put an exclamation point on it, there are enough members of the state Senate and Assembly north of Westchester County, north of Dutchess County, north of Columbia County to actually be the counterbalance to all of the downstate votes, all of them. The issue is that too often legislatures, whether it's Congress or the Senate and Assembly, function only in a partisan nature. It's not that we individually function in a partisan nature. It's that the body functions in a partisan. I served in the New York State Assembly for 7 years before I think all of these gentlemen. The Assembly adopts what 10,000 or considers 10,000 pieces of legislation over the course of 2 years. There aren't 10,000 good ideas. I mean, I love my wife. She loves me. I don't have 10,000 good ideas that she would want to sign on to, let alone other people in the state legislature. And nearly all of them are adopted. Nearly every one that comes to the floor gets adopted. There aren't even that many good ideas that can get that much support. And so what that means consistently is it's more of a performance, not about outcome. And that's where we have to come in. So as a village mayor, we used to say, who are we? How do we hope to live? We as communities have to do more to define what we want to look like and how and what tools are necessary to get there. We can all fight to get the tools to the table. We will all try to work to get resources. You're talking to the second most bipartisan member of Congress. I'll work with anyone who's earnest and honest about solving a problem. But what we also need to do as communities is define what that looks like for us. And too often, we think it can't be done, so we don't try it. And what that means is chambers of commerce, local business associations, dairy farmers, schools, educational institutions, not-for-profits. We really need to be clear on what do we want to, how do we want to get this done? If it's a water or sewer expansion, what does that look like? What dollars are necessary to move it? Who's going to benefit from it? How are we going to achieve it? If it's a comprehensive plan for a community, what should that look like? I'll let you in on a little secret for the towns and villages represented. You don't have to spend $50,000 to do a comprehensive plan like the state requires you to do. Just coming up with a mission, a vision for what it is you want your community, your region to look like. And then to each of you, irrespective of party, don't talk only to the elected officials that share your party affiliation, and don't give only those with whom you agree your support, because it becomes far too easy for us to find our way back to our camps and not reach out across the aisle to accomplish something. And I say this all the time. When I show up in a community, I don't want to be told how wonderful the thing we did was. It's very nice. I'm happy to be thanked. Believe me, my kids don't. So if you want to, that's wonderful. But but what we want to hear is what are the critical things that we can do to make a difference. I used to say this when Chuck Schumer came to town when I was a county executive. He and I don't share party affiliation. When he did something good, I told him thank you. And when I needed something, I was clear about what we needed to get done. And I would say to my Democratic friends, you must do the same thing. You build capacity by defining what we want to achieve, figuring out what tools are necessary to achieve it. We have to work together to make sure that we get you those tools and work in a collaborative and unified way. And what upstate New York has consistently been challenged by is speaking in a single voice. And so downstate speaks in a single voice. You hear it all the time. If they want energy, we get the nuclear power plants. If they need new electricity, they put the pipe, the wire down our river. If they have a policy that helps them deal with some chaos that they've created in their criminal justice system, the rest of us have to live with the after effects. If they need more revenue, we get taxed for it. And I am not an upstate downstate adversary. I get it. We're one whole state. But the policy decisions have to hear our voice. And so in Congress, it is what I have consistently done. When they want to talk about inflation is coming down, keep in mind, inflation coming down just means it's slower on top of what it already grew to. But they talk about it from an urban perspective. We talk about it from a rural perspective. We're driving further to get to school. We're driving longer. We're working longer to pay our bills. Our kids' soccer clubs are 20 minutes away, not right around the block. We want to know what the cost is of decisions made in Washington on rural communities. When we adopt policy like the Farm Bill, we don't necessarily need ag policy for big rectangle states only, where they have massive tracts of farms. We need it for our unique dairies, our unique specialty crops. And so when you speak in a single voice and you put party politics aside, we are more powerful and more capable of bringing that message and then ultimately delivering outcomes. And I'll use this last moment just to say as a plug, I am the fifth most effective member of Congress. I only tell you that in that I really mean it. If we can unify behind a particular idea, we're going to move a piece of legislation. 37 pieces of legislation adopted this year, all of which are focused on substance use, mental health, issues for those dealing with intellectual, physical, and developmental disabilities in rural America, upstate New York. And we're going to keep at it. But we have to speak as in a single voice, and we have to do so, I think, in a much stronger way.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to tell you, we've had a lot of conversation. And by the way, folks, if you do have questions, please come down. I'm only asking questions until I see other hands or more people. But a question first, if I may. We had a lot of conversation about agriculture, and I'd like to get beyond agriculture, if we may, for a few moments and talk about some of those broader workforce development issues. We're here at one of our state university campuses, and the issue, and this may be, well, I think this applies both to federal and state. Issues of funding, budget concerns here at SUNY Delhi. I mentioned earlier lack of a transportation program, lack of public transportation options, I should say, here in Delaware County. Would you spend just briefly, each of you, or whoever wants to respond, some of those other issues, those workforce issues? Brian, you talked about some of the mental health issues. I want to steer our conversation away from agriculture for a moment. Who wants to start?
Only in that I have the mic, and then I'll send it on.
Sounds great.
The federal government transit authority will fund rural transportation. We fund about 90 cents on the dollar. Yes, it's a big lift for communities to have to develop, but microtransit, meaning small, government Uber, is fundable through the federal transit authority. And developing transit-like plans for populations that need to get to either a particular employer or into communities that might have limited access, that is fundable through the federal government, and communities and counties like Delaware can take advantage of that. We're happy to make those connections. Pell flexibility for students, so that those who want to re-enter or work while they're going to school, whether it's a certification level, which by the way is really very important, certification level education, as opposed to expecting everyone only to get through a 4-year degree, which by the way is undermined not only the individual but our entire education system, but rather helping through Pell flexibility will assist in that, so that folks can have access to quality education, maybe to re-enter the workforce, or to work while they're studying. Really important. We ought to ensure full and complete funding of special education at the local level. That's a federal commitment that is yet to be made, that drives down property taxes and opens up educational opportunities for those with IEDs. And then I just would offer to you investing in the trades. Vocational education ought to be as important as traditional academic K-12 education. I tell people my stepdad's the brightest mathematician I've ever met. Brightest mathematician I've ever met. If his head's under the hood of a car. And telling somebody that they can't achieve simply because they can't test or they're not worth it because they can't or don't want to go to four-year degree is just wrong. And giving institutions like this one the capacity to help people identify or make their education goals meet their economic goals is really very important, and would put America's education system back to when we once were a great education system, which was basically to say to people, what is it you want to achieve? Let's help you get there, as opposed to a cookie cutter education system that diminishes and demoralizes people who only think who can't necessarily or don't want to necessarily get through a 4-year degree And we've seen this transition in SUNY schools and community colleges. We commit, federal government, and certainly I commit to continued funding and broaden access to community college certification, trades, and vocational education. Critically important.
My first thought that comes to mind, Ray, is we need to get serious. And what I mean by that is for workforce development issues, a lot of times we in Albany mandate mandates that come down from on high that really don't take into account what the effect is at the Main Street level. And one of these things I'm going to plant a seed with you. This was a discussion, being that I'm on the Labor Committee. We had just pre the end of session. One of the things is being contemplated in Albany is what we call temperature range issues. Okay, one of the subjects was that what is being proposed for businesses is that any degree over 80 degrees or any degree less than 60 degrees would then fall into an area where an employee does not have to physically work. I'll just let that kind of settle on you out there. So again, I go back to being a town supervisor. I'm thinking about plowing roads in the wintertime. I'm thinking about all the work that goes there. As we didn't want to touch on ag, but agriculture does not work on a temperature clock, as we well know. So that was just something that really kind of caught me off guard as well. It did not come to the floor, which I'm extremely happy with, but I'm sure it's something we'll be addressing later on. Ray, I'm also saying licenses and trainings and things of that nature that work against us. I've never been against training, but again, going back to our EMS and firefighting issues, we've increased the training year after year, saying that it will put out a better and more competent individual, and it's actually worked against us. We have not seen the young wanting to take 160 hours of training in BFO, Basic Firefighting 1, to become a volunteer firefighter. Under the education, listen, SUNYs, by far, I have 7 SUNYs in my district, largest of any legislator in New York, with an 8th one literally just about a mile, which is Broome, just outside my district. I'll tell you, it's so important that we continue our moving forward with not only funding, but again, talking to our SUNY stakeholders and what is it they need, not only for workforce development, infrastructure, workforce development, but more appropriately, what can we do to start bringing in the enrollment that they need to accomplish, again, the workforce development side of things.
I'm going to be brief because I listen to these guys for 6 months of the year. I'd rather hear from you. But New York is so terribly business unfriendly. Everybody deserves the dignity of a job to provide for themselves and their family. And New York State continues to amaze me at the ways they find to pay people not to work. But I would rather hear from others.
I'm going to pass on too and just reiterate the same words as Joe. We live in the most unaffordable state in the country. And it's because of bad policy from Albany. And that's why, you know, I don't think that transportation is as big of issue as housing. Housing's a much bigger issue. The reason why nobody wants to stay here is because they can't afford to live here. They would work if you could find a place for them to live that they could afford to live in. But I'll pass it on to Mr. Maher.
Thank you. And just so we can get to your questions, I would add one major thing. I think, yes, bad investments. Any conversation I've had with either workforce development, mental health, healthcare, it really helps to kind of clear a path to where you need to go, because we don't, I think, tap into all of the agencies and organizations and resources that exist currently. Workforce development is too statewide. What everyone is spending statewide in communities and counties, I am still trying to quantify it. I've been in an assembly now for 2 years and I'm working with our staff. It is tough. We have so much resources dedicated to workforce development and mental health. what are we doing with it? And it's very challenging even to quantify where it's going. So redirecting that and making positive investments, to Assemblyman Tague's point earlier, I know the state funding formula for SUNY, we need to take a look at that, especially with the community colleges in terms of when they got hit during COVID because enrollment was down, never got that money back, but inflation still hit them and salaries still hit them and went up. One area where really it will be helpful for workforce development and career paths is building on the public service loan forgiveness programs. We've seen this work in certain industries where you have, if they know they're going into a certain field and in 10 years they can pay their minimum payments and their loans will be forgiven after that period. Not just forgiven, hey, here's cash for your student loans because we need to fix the situation, but you've paid the minimum payments for 10 years. And if you're in this industry, you can have your loans forgiven after that point in time. I know folks that are my age, 50,000, 80,000, completely cleared after 10 years of working hard in a sector. If we build that into other sectors, that is a common sense way of maybe we can help create more opportunities, especially in those areas like EMS and others that need the assistance.
Great, thank you all. As we begin questions, if you would, microphone should be on. Just state your
Yes.
name if,
I guess so.
great.
Yeah. Okay,
Just state
sure.
your name if you would, and then your question, please.
All right. My name is Sigurd Ramos. I'm from Oneonta. And what I'm concerned about is the dark money in politics and how it affects your votes. I feel that you do what the dark money wants you to do, the big money wants you to do, instead of what the people want. And you all claim to be law and order, but yet you'll support someone who is a convicted felon. And my biggest question here is Project 2025. That's the Republican initiative. And I'm very concerned about that because that's going to turn the United States into a fascist government. And it's there. It's there.
If we could,
That is
if-
nonsense.
if we
This
could,
is-
Yeah,
this
it's
is-
there. It's 1,000-page
Sir,
document.
Sir, that is nonsense. We came here to talk about economic development
Okay.
and through the chamber, not about politics.
I want to hear from the people. I'm okay.
well, this is not the appropriate forum to talk about politics. It's to talk about policy, not politics this morning.
Gentlemen, my concern is energy related. With the great national push to electric vehicles, my questions, two of them are, where's the electricity going to come from? And secondly, has there been any focus on what I read was the demonization of nuclear industry? And is there any focus potentially on creating nuclear energy as a help to this country's energy needs?
Well, first of all, that's part of the bad policy that I was speaking about earlier was mandating of EVs. First of all, there's no school district in rural upstate New York that can even begin to afford the mandate that these folks have put on them. Secondly, you're absolutely right. The grid cannot handle all the electrification that needs to be done to meet the goals that they want you to meet. This is what I was talking about earlier. Stop mandating people. Do you know that this last week they passed a bill that now requires anybody in the state of New York, if you build a new home, you have to have an EV charger and a parking spot, a designated parking spot on your property in the house that you built. Unconstitutional, but it passed both houses. This is what I'm talking about. Priorities and investment. People, this is what people care about. Okay. They can't afford to live. That's number one. Number two is the safety and security in their communities. Okay. And third is the education for their children. That's what people care about right now. That's what we have been working at in Albany. That's why when bills come on the floor, sometimes we're able to stop them because they're pure nonsense. Pure nonsense. Who's next?
You know, I'm of the mindset that if it's a really good idea, it really kind of takes traction. It'll self perpetuate itself. And we really didn't look to the stakeholders on EV and vehicles. And so let me, I'll support this by saying, being the ranker on transportation and as a former school bus driver, which gave me great experience for working in the Senate, by the way, is having eyes in the back of your head. A 55 passenger school bus, like I used to drive, with 55 children on board, the laden weight of an EV bus with that many children on it, the infrastructure has to be reevaluated. And I'm specifically talking about the weight rated bridges that I used to have to traverse with my bus. It's something that was never even considered. Traveling then, one of the longest athletic runs we had from Skinevus would have been to Osceola Valley. And in the wintertime, when it's February and it's 12 below zero out, what is going to be the reduction of that battery power, not only to travel, but just to keep the bus in a environmental temperature range that is acceptable? And if I had to charge, I charge on the opposing school's dime. So you can see where I was going. When I started to raise these questions, we're then easily put into, you're a denier, you don't want green. No, I don't. It's not that I don't want green energy. It's not that I don't want those type of things. I just want a well thought out transitional plan, or a longer runway, if you will, for the institution of this. And if it was that good of an idea, we wouldn't have to mandate that schools and that people and that communities are going to have to put in an EV charging center in every new house built. So, listen, we're not there yet. We can get there, but we need a much longer runway.
I really appreciated the question. You talked about energy policy, and I share some of the same sort of granular concerns. But not only does New York State not have an energy policy, this country doesn't have an energy policy. There is no unified energy policy, whether it's how we transition from traditional fossil fuel, with natural gas as being a transitionary energy, to clean, or how do we effectively develop clean energy alternatives in a way that can sustain us. There is no such plan. There's hope and there is wishing, but there's not a unified plan. What we've developed, and we've said this consistently, at least in the House, is one: we should not be reliant on foreign fossil fuels, and that's a real problem. Just as an example, upstate New York, north of, we'll say Dutchess County, north of Dutchess County, 85% of our energy is actually renewable. It's hydroelectric or nuclear. But when you go Dutchess County south, 85% is fossil fuel, and it's the dirtiest. Why? Closure of Indian Point. You could suggest that was a good idea or not. I would suggest there's no plan for what to do when they closed it. Resulted in New York purchasing more of its electric through traditional fossil fueled electric generation. Where does that gas and where does that oil come from? Currently, it comes from Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. Doesn't come from America. Why is that a value? American natural resources we have the highest degree of regulation when it comes to environmental protection. We have the greatest labor protections of any of the countries we purchase from. And we are able to our refineries are only able to refine our energy. And so we're able to produce it cleaner, with more labor protections at a lower cost. This state and the country, however, has diminished the capacity. If, again, you want to transition to renewable, I'm an all of the above kind of energy policy person. Transition to renewable, the only way to do that is to rely less on dirty fossil fuel and more on clean fossil fuel. Transition to renewable. The way to do that is to stop relying on Russia, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, and China's influence, and rely on what we can produce and generate here. And we've got enough to make that sort of transition. Secondly, there is no such thing as an electric grid. We always say this: our grid, the grid. There is no grid. There is a patchwork of grids that don't speak to one another well. They don't transmit electricity well. And they're increasingly aged. If you look in New York, some of our electric infrastructure is worse than some third world countries. Why? Because of the state structure that limits, well, we pay a lot, but none get to the capital investment. And so we don't even have the capacity as a country to take some of the new energy generation and move it into our grid in an affordable way. And so all of that has to be confronted. How does that happen? We got to get people in the workforce who do that sort of work. And instead of going from, I mean, we have a schizophrenic energy policy. Instead of going one day to the next with sort of different focuses, we ought to be working, federal government with 50 state governments, on a unified effort to, yeah, transition and rely more on renewable, but do it in a way that relies first on clean American energy as opposed to foreign adversaries, dirty, destructive energy.
Thank you, Congressman. The electric vehicles are going to come. When people want them. Right now, that decision is trying to be forced upon us and legislated, and it's just not working. New York State, upstate, is already clean and green. You know, Niagara Falls, St. Lawrence Seaway, and my district has approximately 70 miles of Pennsylvania border. And across that border, there's fracking going on. They're getting the natural gas out of there, and the state said that the world was going to come to an end if we did that in the southern tier. Yet over that magic line into Pennsylvania, cows are not dropping dead. People are not being poisoned. It's just not happening. So it's being done over there, but New York State is trying to save the world at the expense of New York businesses. And they're forcing all kinds of rules, regulations, and laws on New York businesses. I have it's a big district. I've got 40 some school districts. One of the school districts was trying to electrify. And they found out that when they got the power company to bring in the infrastructure to get to the bus garage, after it's been modified for the newer buses and the electrification, it was going to cost so much. And this is typical of my schools. It's a K through 12 in one building. It was going to be a bus garage with a school district attached to it. That's how much disproportionate the money was. The school bus garage was going to cost more than their school district. So we're just not ready for it. I wanted to do it. I tried to get an electric vehicle. My district office is 38 miles from my house, and I'm a Jeep guy, and a Jeep will take me 27 miles on a charge. So there you have it. So I did the next best thing. I got the most fuel efficient Jeep I could. I drive a diesel Jeep, and I'm getting over 30 miles to the gallon. But we're going to get there. It's coming, but we're doing it. New York is going to be very clean and green, but it's going to be at the expense of our business. And it's also going to be at the expense of kids in Africa mining with their hands to get cobalt out of the Congo. And I had to bring this up because it's the truth. You know, we all want to be righteous and say, oh, we're saving the world, when there's 14-year-old boys over there digging and dying in cobalt mines, trying to get the resources necessary for our batteries. But again, I'm going to yield to people I'd rather hear from.
Yeah, just to add, I think to answer your question on nuclear, every conversation I've had with an energy expert says that nuclear is the cleanest, cheapest, best way for us to move forward. And every conversation I've had with folks that are making these decisions and being in these discussions, once you say the word nuclear, it's immediately off the table. And our move away from that, I think, is more about not having a narrative and having a bad narrative. And going green and being clean has been pushed, and it's the cool thing to do, but it impacts the consumers in ways that the consumers did not know and do not know and are experiencing now. And then you have that coupled with political victories, being first, right? Why are we in a rush? Assemblyman Angelino is correct. That's the future. We're going to see EVs, energy efficiency, things are going to be coming, but let it come at its own pace when the market dictates it, when it makes sense, when it doesn't cost us in business and our youth. And honestly, it's said all the time in our chamber, what is clean energy? When you have dependency on a youth labor workforce from other countries, that's not clean energy. There's nothing clean about that. So to answer your question, unfortunately, I don't see that happening, but it should. And many of us are still trying to talk about this conversation with people to see if we can meaningfully move it forward.
Ma'am?
Hi, my name is Kathy Walters. I'm a resident of the town of Sydney. My question is actually directed to Congressman Marc Molinaro as it pertains to the safety and businesses of our community. At a country music festival in Las Vegas, a madman using a bump stock enhanced rifle fired over 1,000 rounds in 10 minutes. When he was done, 60 people died and 413 were wounded. Donald Trump outlawed bump stocks, but the Supreme Court has made them legal again, saying it is up to Congress to outlaw them, not the executive branch. Are you, Congressman Molinaro, or would you take legislative action by proposing or supporting a bill to outlaw bump stocks?
I've yet to read the Supreme Court decision, but I know it's a matter that we're certainly going to discuss. I will tell you that I'm more concerned about the person pulling the trigger, and I think that we as a society often ignore the fact that there are so many that grow up in our communities with knowing full well that there are moments of trauma in their lives that manifest themselves ultimately as incidents. Excuse me, that manifest themselves and ultimately individuals act out in violent ways against themselves or others. We choose not to intervene. And what I would offer to you is first, we live in a state with some of the strictest gun control policies in the country, and yet we consistently see violence taking the lives of individuals. And what I think that we need to be serious about is that if you commit a crime with a firearm, that you're prosecuted for committing a crime with a firearm. And so while I'm not prepared to answer what legislative action we would take, I think I hope you would respect that the appropriate approach for anyone holding a legislative office is to read the final determination and then decide how legislatively it could be addressed, not ruling it out, but I'm not saying to you that I'm in a position to pursue such a thing. But what I do think is in states like ours and in this country, we ought to prosecute firearm crimes as firearm crimes. When 60% of firearm related crimes in the state of New York are not prosecuted as firearm crimes, then I don't think the state is taking seriously violence. When those who commit lower level offenses are allowed to walk out onto the street without any intervention, I don't think we're taking violence seriously. And if we want to ensure the safety of our community, it starts there. And to pretend like it doesn't is foolhardy. I saw this as a county executive. We invested heavily in early intervention measures, low level offense intercession, and then, yeah, very strict prosecution of those who acted out in violent ways. Why? Because that's how you prevent crime, that's how you prevent violence, and that's how you save lives. And I saw the result of that over 8 years. 60% reduction in inmate population, 40% reduction in violent crimes in my community. That's how we as a society ought to take it seriously. And I appreciate the specificity of the question. I offer to you that in order to make our community safe, in order to save lives, we have to confront it in a holistic way. And that's what I've committed myself to.
Oh, okay. But I guess my question is, would you, I mean, we're talking bump stocks. Would you, on a federal level, on a
I
state
know what you're, I
level,
know you're using the
on a
same,
state,
ma'am,
can I finish?
well, I didn't,
I
I'm
don't,
happy to have you finish, sure.
I guess I'll just sit
We're,
down.
we're limited as to
okay,
time.
sit down.
I
You-
think
you
the
didn't
question
answer it.
was.
No, I
Okay,
did
the
answer your question.
is,
Ma'am, I did. I said to you
you
that
said
I
you don't
have,
know, you wouldn't know. because
have
you
yet to read
see
the Supreme-
There, okay, I'll sit down.
I was,
No,
I'm happy to answer questions that they throw at me.
it's okay, we're done, it's okay.
No, we're
But
not, ma'am.
if
My
you're
answer,
referencing that this may not be of the forum, we're talking about the safety.
I
of
didn't say
business.
that. So I want to,
Okay. No, yeah, absolutely.
We're-
yeah. so
we're coming up to almost noon.
Ray, I
and
just want to say
wanna-
this. Ray, I apologize. She has a valid question. There are gentlemen
Yeah.
here who know the detail of the Supreme Court decision. I didn't say that you put words in my mouth. I have yet to read the Supreme Court decision, and therefore I'm not in a position to say how I might react. I think you all know this. I am a defender of our Second Amendment rights, and I don't think that making sort of a callous back and forth is in our interest. I'm happy to follow up with you afterwards.
Yeah, and everyone, each of these five gentlemen will be around after we conclude for some personal conversations.
Ms. Walters? Yes, I did read the Supreme Court decision, and it was a statutory decision because a machine gun is defined as it fires more than one shot with one single pull of the trigger. And a bump stock, you have to pull the trigger each time. The Supreme Court said they need to legislate the item. The law that they wrote for outlawing machine guns has not kept up with technology. And to be honest with you, you don't need a bump stock. I can teach anybody in this room how to fire a semi-automatic rifle without using a bump stock, but you have to pull the trigger every time. It's the recoil and how you hold it. The bump stock just made it so everybody can do it. So it's a statutory thing that the legislation has to somehow express that it fires more than so many rounds in such amount of time. But the law right now, as the Supreme Court read it, it says you have to pull the trigger only once to get more than one round out. And a bump stock does not do that. So that's why they said it's statutorial. So they just need to correct that. So
And-
get the term bump stock out of your head because you don't need one to have that happen.
And our final question, returning to economic development issues, comes Jim Thompson, who's head of
Good
our
morning. I'm
chairman of our.
Jim Thompson. I'm board chair of the Delaware County IDA. I'd like to ask a question of all the participants, actually. There's two different questions here. From the state level, New York State has spent a year and a half or 2 years stumbling and bumbling, trying to institute a cannabis industry in New York State. And it's causing tremendous problems on the local scene. It reminds me of the failed system that the state instituted for hemp about 5 years ago, where many farmers invested in a lot of money and their life savings into growing hemp, only to be left hanging in the wind because there was no processing in place. So that industry was a failure. Now we're seemingly doing the same thing with the cannabis industry. So that's my state portion. On the federal portion, one of the problems that we're having, Congressman Marc Molinaro, is in financing cannabis operations. We need to have some ability to work with the banking industry, and that has to come from the approval from the federal level. I believe it's being held up in the Senate at this point in time. But I'd like you to expand on that.
You're correct, and I apologize, Ray. I have to be in Hancock now. If I'll answer this, and then if you'll let me, I have to get to my next stop. The Safe Banking Act was adopted by the House. It was stalled in the Senate. We do think that there there is some progress on agreement. We hope before the end of this year. This would allow for those that have legalized cannabis in their states, and for business practices, it would allow banking to be extended to them, irrespective of other federal or other state regulation. I co-sponsor the Safe Banking Act. We're hopeful. Senator Schumer has expressed some interest in moving the legislation this cycle, so we think we're very close to getting approval. I'm hopeful that would occur prior to the end of this year. I do apologize. I do thank all of you, and please feel free to reach back to us in any way. Happy to communicate, answer any questions.
Thank you, Congressman. Safe travels to you. The cannabis, in the chambers, we debated the cannabis rollout and the legalization. And that was the debate that changed the rules of the assembly, that we could only debate something for 4 hours, because that went on for, I don't know, 10, 11 hours. And many people on both sides of the aisle pointed out a lot of problems with this. The issue was, we had a bunch of impatient people who promised constituents they were going to be able to light up at midnight. And they literally took that bill package down to the second floor to get the governor to sign it to take effect immediately. And there were so many flaws in that we pointed out that were just unconstitutional, like picking certain people to get on the list first, who had a higher priority. Convicted felons were number one on the list of the people who could get the license. The communities that the tax dollars was going to go to, we set aside that night $40 million to start it up. And that $40 million was going to be taken care of in the very first 6 months of the tax revenue that we're going to get. And I don't think they've gotten even $20 million in tax revenue yet. There were lawsuits involved with it. Everything that we brought up happened. And now they promised agriculture, the producers, they promised these people that they were going to have a market, and there is no market. And it's exactly like you said, just like with hemp, they left those producers out to dry, swinging in the wind with a product that they're not allowed to sell. We brought up the fact that, this isn't legal federally yet, and this is going to be an all cash business because banks aren't allowed to. They didn't care. They were impatient and wanted to pass it through. This was the most egregious of the push it through knee jerk laws that we got to get signed. And then now that's why we're dealing with the repercussions. So be careful with other knee jerk laws that we pass, because the unintended consequences are just insurmountable. And Chris has some expertise here.
Depends on what you're talking about. But maybe after we're done here, it may be a good time, right? Joe made some really good points. There were some hesitation from many in our conference and some in the majority conference. Our biggest concern when the municipal end of it, I think everybody was supportive of. It was set up properly. We had producers, and things were going fine. They started off with the hemp, and as you said, I represent a good part of the Upper Hudson Valley myself. And a lot of the hemp farmers went under because they invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in processing equipment, and the hemp sat in their barns with no place to go and nothing to do, and they lost everything. The biggest problem, and I've been kind of talking about this all day long, is unfortunately in New York, we have legislators and people in high offices that promise the world, and they just go and do it and worry about the consequences later. This is what happened with the legalization of marijuana. If everybody remembers, Governor Cuomo, it wasn't all that of a popular idea when everybody first came out. And we said, after time, when it was explained properly and how it was going to work, people started to say, well, you know what? Maybe this isn't a bad idea. But the governor really did not tell the truth to everybody. He said that he was going to travel to all the states that legalized it, and he was going to make a list of the good and the bad and make sure that New York State didn't make the mistakes that other states did. Well, guess what? Not only did we make mistakes that the other states did, but we made our own mistakes. We're, I think, the third administration in the Office of Cannabis Control. I mean, it's at the point again now where we're having producers that are starting to run into the same problem as our hemp producers did. And, my concern is that part of the selling point for this was that we were going to help out farmers that were diversifying to sell other to get involved in other products. Hasn't happened. Um, you know, the marketing part of it, that the Office of Cannabis was going to do that. I don't know that they've done such a great job at that as well. You have neighboring states where it's cheaper for people to go to Massachusetts or Connecticut and get their product. They'd rather drive an hour and a half than drive 15 miles because they can get it cheaper. You know, they should have waited. It's just like with that we've talked about all day long with the renewable energy policy and all these things. Stop mandating people to do certain things. Let them get the thing up and running and do it right the first time. And then things will fall in place. Right now, you got all these people on the black market selling it because they don't have to worry about anything and they're making more money. It's like this poor lady out here that's struggling, her and her husband to run a business, and they're doing everything the right way, and they're doing it how the program was designed to do it, but they can't do it because government has gotten in the way and hasn't kept their end of the bargain. I guess is the best way to pay it. The worst thing is to allow government to get involved with any type of business. I said it. I'm dead serious. This coming from a person that has been business in my life. If you want to screw something up, get the government involved. Dead serious. Let people do what they do best. Let people run their businesses.
My concern is that I think we all are aware of what the problem is, but nobody is talking about a solution to the problem.
So
So
there's actually, I was actually going to hit on a couple of those. So over this legislative session, there was a major focus on the illicit sales of cannabis, and there was a lot of pieces of legislation that were passed that the governor may sign into law that will hopefully deter bad actors from acting the way they have because of the way the policies were set up. In terms of your position with the IDA, in terms of a larger conversation, that's probably something I would love to entertain in the future. Also, when it comes to the idea, I'd love to talk more about the UTEP that you guys have, the conversations that you work with in terms of the chamber, the community colleges, and what kind of collaborations are taking place, because the IDA can be such an amazing tool for growth and innovation. So looking forward to catching up with you.
thank you very much.
And we're already past noon, so I'm going to ask each of you just a quick yes or no. Hear that, Chris? Quick. We're in consolidated. Absolutely not. We're in the consolidated funding application season. The applications are out. The applications are due in another month or so. We'll be hosting a workshop here next Tuesday afternoon from 1 to 3:30 in Sanford Hall. The governor has made it very clear that communities, Chris, you talked about housing as being a huge concern. It's one that we have here in Delaware County. It's one that you're seeing, each of you are seeing throughout your districts, and it's a problem that we have here in New York State. The governor has made it clear that in order for a community or a business or a nonprofit organization to avail themselves fully of the resources available through the CFA process, that municipality needs to start the process to become a pro-housing certified community. So my yes or no question is, do you support the idea that each of our communities initiate that process to become pro-housing communities?
What's the percentage again to be pros? Was it 2%? Was that the threshold?
It is 1% over 3 years.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. That's just my opinion.
Or pass a very aspirational resolution saying essentially, yay, housing.
Again, they need to have increased housing. I don't think there's anything wrong with encouraging local communities to support housing, get creative and thinking about housing. I don't think 1% is unreasonable. So I would say I'm a bit indifferent. If it was something that would probably prevent the community from actually getting the funding, I'd be against it. But I don't think that'd be the case here. Just my opinion.
Well, this is the point that we try to make all the time, especially those of us that represent rural areas. Main Street Delhi is nowhere near the same as Main Street Manhattan. The housing needs are much different. The costs, the type, and I'll bring up a perfect example, and I'm going to use SUNY Delhi as an example. Because I have, besides SUNY Delhi, I have SUNY Cobleskill in my district, but I also have Columbia Green Community College in my district. And it's on the wish list of the administration at the college that at least a quarter of the kids that graduate, or young adults, I should call them, graduate, would find a career within the community. So they have tried some housing projects in the Catskill and Hudson area to try to capture some of those graduating young adults to get them to stay in the community. I'm all for it. The problem is that you have to define what type of housing it is, how big a housing. That's the problem. Because the same type of housing that works in our suburbs and works in our cities is not the same type of housing that's going to work in Delhi or Cobleskill or Catskill or Walton. You're talking about a different animal. And this is the point, and I can tell you right now that everybody on this stage has made this same argument time and time again with our colleagues on the same side of the aisle and on the other side of the aisle. New York is so unique. Now, probably California is the only other, it was probably another state that's very similar to ours. There are big differences from Montauk to Jamestown. Big, big differences. And I have always said that we should be allowed as legislators to legislate for our areas and what works and what doesn't. Instead, it's always one glove fits all. And as I said earlier, what's good for Manhattan is not good for Main Street Delhi. So I think on top of all this, we also need to change the way we legislate, at least more on issues that affect local governments and local communities.
So I think that's a qualified yes.
It's going to be the same as Mr. Maher. I definitely support some sort of housing for the rural area. I just don't know if I support the same as what
Absolutely.
is being done in the
Local
suburbs.
decisions. Assemblyman Angelino, we're talking about that we're in the CFA process and the governor has made it very clear that only those communities that have started, at least initiated the pro-housing initiative certification process would receive certain discretionary funds as they become available through the executive committee. So the question is, do you support our local communities to start that pro-housing process?
What I do support is home rule. And the state legislature is circumventing home rule and trying to centralize all the power, all the authority, and all the financial support out of Albany. So you do as Albany says, or you don't get the money. I don't like that. We saw it with the solar energy fields and the wind turbines that they can go opposed to zoning. And then the town thought, well, now we've got this industrial complex, we can assess it differently. Oh, no, you can't do that either. They're whittling away at the home rule. It would be nice if, again, Chris said, one size doesn't fit all. And, the city of Norwich is my home. They came up with their own idea on how to do it. And it took state legislation, and myself and Senator Oberacker got that passed. We hope the governor signs that. So like I said, I came in late, but there is somebody in Albany whose job it is, and whatever agency you're dealing with, their job is to make sure that state funding gets out the door and you use it. So it's such a bureaucracy to get that money and to meet the goals of whatever that agency has set. So I just, you're trying to do the best you can for your community, but they're trying to set the rules that one size fits all, and it just doesn't work.
Okay. Senator?
No.
You get the final comment of the morning.
This was supposed to be what, just a yes or no answer?
Well,
I didn't.
No, I'm not saying that. I just thank God that that was the shortest yes answer I've ever heard from Assembly and Take. So Chris, well done. I just want, so my quick answer is yes, I would support it. But the devil's in the details. We just talked about a rollout for cannabis that to me was not really done with foresight and with follow through. Some ideas that come to my mind, Ray, that are factors, contractors. Hard to find more upstate in our rural areas than downstate. So could there be a carve out for the fact that we have a harder time finding contractors? And number one, bringing up the issue of watershed here in Delaware, another big issue. Would we be able to get some relief from the state for those issues, right? When it comes to watershed, no other county deals with it as much as Delaware does. Again, I said the cannabis rollout was really well conceived and well followed through. I would much hope that we wouldn't have communities that have gone ahead and spent a lot of money and then have the rug pulled out from underneath it from Albany. So the answer is yes, but I'd like to see a better plan.
thank you. And thank you all for joining us this morning, turned into this afternoon, for those answers. We covered, and I have to let Mr. Thompson ask another question.
I'm back. I'm sorry. This is more directed at the audience than it is at the panel. I want everybody, Ray mentioned earlier that we're approaching the season for the CFAs are due for funding consideration in Albany. We are very interested at the Office of Economic Development in helping anyone who wants to submit a CFA to the state. And remember, this is your one and only time during the year that you can submit a grant application to the state for an economic development project. We're there to assist you. If you are interested, please call the Office of Economic Development. Ask for Glenn Nealis. The phone number is 607-832-5123. Thank you.
And I hope that you will attend the workshop that we have scheduled for next Tuesday afternoon in Sanford Hall. It's going to be informative, educational, and hopefully no conversation about things like cobalt or bump stocks. Thank you all of you for joining us here this morning. Thank you to our sponsors for this morning's program, the Office of Continuing Education and Workforce Development here at SUNY Delhi, the Reporter, and for the recordings that we have this morning. 3 of them, in fact, from Delhi Telephone, the Reporter, and here at SUNY Delhi. We will be posting a recording of this morning's program on the Chamber's YouTube channel, probably in a couple days. So I encourage you to look at that. In the hallway, there's some more information about the Chamber, a pledge poster that I hope that you all will take and post somewhere, remind people the importance of shopping locally and supporting our local businesses. You know, at the Delaware County Chamber, I mentioned earlier in the program that we engage many voices, and we certainly heard that this morning, so that we can speak with one voice. And that's what the Chamber aspires to do on behalf of our businesses. I value the relationship I have with each of these gentlemen here on stage. Oh, and the one that left early as well. I consider them all friends, and I appreciate and value that relationship, that I'm able to call them or text them on a Sunday afternoon and say, what are you thinking, on behalf of our businesses? That's the power of coming together. That's the power of speaking with one voice. If you're not already a member of the Delaware County Chamber, I encourage you to consider that and tell some friends that perhaps they need to be a member of the chamber as well. Thank you again for joining us here this morning. I suspect some of you at least will be staying afterwards for some private conversations. And DelawareCounty.org is the Chamber's website. You can see information about lots of different events that we have coming up, including a business resource fair tomorrow afternoon in Margaretville. So I look forward to seeing you all at an upcoming chamber event real soon. Thanks again.